This is a kind of court dance called a Sicilienne. That would have been a court dance style of music. When he was sort of in his 20s and on into almost 30, he worked in the court of Weimar, a very famous court, where he had an appointment both playing the organ and writing church music, vocal music, and writing some court music. He was the violinist for the chamber orchestra there. So for a while in Weimar, he was doing both church music and court music at the same time. Then for 6 years, he went to the court of Anhalt-Köthen. We heard the name Anhalt a lot today, didn't we, on our tours, being in the Saxon region. So for 6 years, he was a court musician in Anhalt-Köthen, where the prince was an amateur player of the viola da gamba, because the viola da gamba by then was seen as a royal instrument. It was certainly some hotshot professionals played it, but it was also an instrument that royalty played, like the prince up in Potsdam, Frederick the Great's nephew, who played this instrument. Well, there was one thing that Bach couldn't write while he was in Anhalt-Köthen, and that was church music, because the Duke there was actually a Calvinist. He practiced the Reform religion, and they didn't have fancy church music. So for 6 years, Bach didn't really write any church music. He concentrated on writing concertos and pieces like that. He would have written the Brandenburg concertos there, and he got interested in the music of Vivaldi, so he was learning about how Italians wrote concertos. Let me play you a little bit of a piece in concerto style, so you can see the kinds of things that Bach would have written for the court gamba player in Anhalt-Köthen. So that was kind of imitating the Italian flashy style of violin concertos. So all his life, Bach was practicing all kinds of music, not just serious church music, but secular music in all kinds of styles. So why would he leave a cushy court job where the Duke played this instrument and loved music and really seemed to appreciate him? Well, there were a couple things. First of all, not everybody in the Duke's family loved music as much as he did, and not everyone at the court was as willing to let a Lutheran family practice the Lutheran religion in their Calvinist town. So Bach started to get a little worried that as his sons got older and approached university age, that maybe he should find a better situation for the family. Well, think of a Lutheran town where there's a really good university. It's called Leipzig, and the job comes open there, and you remember what we heard. Bach applies for it. They don't really want him. He's not the #1 choice. He's the #3 choice, but they take the mediocre musician. And he ends up in Leipzig. By then, he's 38 years old. This is a man with a lot of career experience. But he's still, you all remember the age of 38, right? You still have a lot of energy when you're 38. And wow, he worked so hard those first few years in Leipzig. He was churning out a new church piece every week. When the cantata was finished on Sunday, he got up the next morning, Monday morning, and started to write a new one. And he had most of it finished by Thursday, but then the parts had to be copied. So his sons and his wife, Anna Magdalena, and all his assistants had to start writing out the violin parts and the parts for all the singers. Because everybody, and those boys had to start learning how to sing the piece that they were going to do on Sunday. It's Thursday. Think how hard he's working in churning this music out. And for the first 6 or 8 years, he's writing a new piece every week. He's writing gigantic pieces, like some of you might be aware of that 3-hour piece for Good Friday called the St. Matthew Passion or the St. John Passion. These are enormous pieces of music. What do they use in them? They use Luther's chorales a great deal, but there's also that he's reharmonizing and working into new situations. But he's also writing very complicated pieces of music for solo singers and for solo instruments. And I'm going to play a little snippet for you of a piece from the St. Matthew Passion that's for solo viola da gamba and a solo singer. Bach's music is never just to sound pretty, although it does. His music is full of theological meaning. He actually does care about his soul in the Lutheran way, and so he thinks, and he quite believes, if he writes a good piece of music, it's not that it's a good work, but that he should do it, that it's the right thing to do. So this is from a famous viola da gamba solo in the Bach St. Matthew Passion. It's called Komm süßes Kreuz, Come Sweet Cross. And it is not meant to be a piece that an amateur can play. It's meant to be hard. So this is how a section of it sounds. That's part of Komm süßes Kreuz. Well, let me tell you what's in that piece. Again, it's not symbolism that means anything to us. But again, the first symbol is that it's written for the royal instrument. So by writing it for the gamba, Bach is reminding the listeners that God, Christ, who's suffering on the cross, is a king. So that's the first symbol. The viola da gamba says, this is music for a king. It's also written in, believe it or not, a courtly style that came out of France. And what's the greatest court in France? Versailles, of course. So this is a style of music that originated at Versailles. Whenever Louis XIV came into the room, they played this kind of style of music. It was the royal dance that was for the entrance of royalty. And King Louis would strut into the room, and everybody knew, shut up, the king's coming. So again, by writing in this French court style, that I'm not saying that every single listener in the Leipzig congregation on that Good Friday when this happened understood that, but a lot of people understood that this is music meant for a king. Bach is saying, I understand that Jesus on the cross is also the king. The other thing is, when you look at the music, and this is where Bach is kind of writing partly for his own soul, not only for the listeners. If you look at the page, the notes form a bunch of crosses. You can all come up later if you want, before you go out and look at the page. It's full of sort of angular ups and downs that actually sort of draw crosses on the page. So visually, even though you're never going to see it sitting down there in the church when you're listening to the 3-hour church service, Bach knows that he's drawn a cross on that page. And actually, when you get to the melody, it's even in the shape of a cross. When the singer comes in, he goes, Komm süßes Kreuz. It's in the shape of a cross. So that is something to remember when you hear Bach's music. It's never just the beautiful sound, although the beautiful sound is enough. It's full of, from his point of view, theological meaning that he spent hours struggling with to get right. All right, well, one other thing we learned about today was that Leipzig was a great place for coffee houses, right? And, of course, Bach, his first 6 or 8 or even 10 years is working really hard on the church music. He finally started noticing that not that many people cared. and that the church council was a pain in the whatever, as so often committees can be. Anybody here ever worked in a committee? Did you love the committee that was responsible for describing your job, your job performance? Well, same thing. They would, Bach would write this great music, and they would say, sometimes Bach's music is hard to follow. We don't always, can he write simpler things? And he's like, well, forget it. Fine. I won't write new music. So after 8 or 10 years, he doesn't bother to write a new piece every week. He just starts recycling the old stuff. But by then, his sons are in the university, and he'd always hired a few university students to come and help play in the church music. Because the university kids could play. They could get around. Even if they were law students, they often played violin well, and so he could hire them to play. So there was a collegium, there was a bunch of students that met at a coffee house every week for a few hours, and they hired Bach to come in and be their music director and write pieces for them in concerto style, not church style. And some of Bach's sons were involved in that. So he actually spent, from the mid-1730s on, he put a lot of his musical energy into writing new music for the collegium of university students at the coffee house.